Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Safest Family on the Block, where knowledge is power. I'm your host, Jason, and joining me today is Joan Siff of WATCH, which stands for World Against Toys Causing Harm. Joan, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Jason, thank you so much for having me.
You're talking about it's kind of a niche topic that is so important to our kids' safety, but one I think a lot of us don't think about on a more conscious level. The news is always about the school shootings, stranger abduction, firearm deaths, and things like that. But toys that harm and sometimes even kill children is a thing that happens every year. So could you tell me a little bit about how WATCH got started and how you got started with WATCH?
Sure. Well, WATCH is an organization, a nonprofit that works to raise awareness among families and consumers so they can make more informed choices about the toys they buy, and also to put some pressure on the industry to make sure that dangerous toys don't reach the market in the first place. And the organization was formed, originally its founder, Edward Swartz, who started the 10 Worst Toy List, which we have coming out next week. It's the 50th year, actually. So 50 years ago, he was asked to testify in Washington about what was out there when it came to toys. And what he found in his investigation was really atrocious. This toys, you take off a doll's head and there was a spike. And there was, it was basically the wild, wild west back then in terms of toy regulation. There was practically none. So he decided to come up with the 10 Worst Toy List as a way to keep parents and families informed every year about what was out there. And there was so much interest in it that eventually he formed World Against Toys Causing Harm. And we work year round to draw attention to the very serious issue of toy safety.
Outstanding. Now, one of our other repeat offenders here, a woman named Rita Robinson, who's a consumer advocacy journalist, mentions that one of the big problems we're facing now is that there used to be an infrastructure for product recalls where the government would let the local papers know, and then somebody on staff at the local papers would put together a column once a week or so. But that has completely fallen apart in the last 10 or 20 years as daily papers lose budget and finally go away completely. So the way that we were supposed to find out about recalled products, it just isn't there anymore. So what are some of the better resources that we can use now to be proactive about finding out what toys are harmful and which ones are safe?
Well, many steps. The first step is I would encourage everyone you can sign up online for recall notices with the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And you can specify if you want recall notices of just children's products or of all their recalls. That's probably the most direct way. But I also want to caution families, and that's one of the reasons I know you're having me on today, is that you have to do your own investigation because not all unsafe toys and products are recalled. And there's also a lag when a toy is going to be recalled and when the public can find out about it. In fact, that's been publicized a lot recently. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has its hands tied in a way based on one of the regulations that, in essence, they need the cooperation of the manufacturers before they publicize certain hazards, even if they know of those hazards. So as you can see, there's a conflict of interest there. And then, a lot of toys that actually meet some of the standards that are out there can also be dangerous, and we can talk a little bit about that. So really keep yourself informed about the recalls, but also know that there may be other dangerous toys out there.
Yeah. And as you said, in a week or so, you're going to release this year's version of the 10 Worst Toys. Historically, have there been some specific toys or category of toys that keep popping up on that list over the decades?
Yes, and the 10 Worst Toys is actually, they're not the only 10 toys that are potentially unsafe out there, but we picked them because they're representative of what you were saying, of the different categories of toys, many of which we find reappearing year after year, which is shocking. Because once a hazard is identified, you'd hope that it doesn't reappear in a newly designed toy, but that's just not the case. So the some of the hazards that we find every year, for instance, are small parts, toys with small parts sold to oral age children, sold to infants, to toddlers. There's really no excuse for that. We know that small parts can lead to choking injuries, and choking injuries can be deadly. So, the question is, why are these toys still being sold? And another type of hazard that we find a lot are long strings on toys sold to young children, sold to babies. And this brings up an interesting issue, actually, is the issue of classification. Because if a toy is labeled a crib toy, it actually cannot have a string that's longer than 12 inches, because that's a known strangulation hazard for children. But if it's not sold as a crib toy, yet it's still sold to a 1-year-old, it can have a string that's 12 inches or longer. So clearly there's more work to be done when it comes to the regulations.
Now, if it was me personally, I wouldn't want to play lawyer with the definition of a toy, and I'd want to err on the side of caution. But there are other other motivators and other considerations, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised the things I've heard. For instance, a toy that is not considered a toy by the manufacturer, but it's actually sold in the toy aisle. But that's the defense that it's not called a toy.
That does not fill me with confidence in the responsibility of the industry. So choking hazards and strangling hazards are two of the kind of genres of toy, I guess you'd say, that we should keep a special eye out for. What are some of the other ones that routinely come up?
Sure. Well, one hazard that we've been talking about a lot this past year that we really want to raise awareness about are button batteries or coin cell batteries in toys. So there's about, I don't know, maybe 2,300 button battery injuries a year to children. And we're talking, these injuries are devastating. Children have died when they've ingested these type of batteries. They are just the right size to be ingested and then get stuck in the esophagus or the intestines, where they leak toxic chemicals. And I mean, the injuries are just terrible. There's a young child, an 18-month-old, I believe, who died a couple years ago, and her mother actually is a great advocate for getting more battery safety regulations in place, and that was just passed. It's called Reese's Law, which will hopefully make sure that batteries are secured when they're in toys and other household products. But I really want people to keep in mind this year that these types of batteries have caused horrendous injuries, and maybe consider not buying toys that have button batteries.
Or for that matter, other household objects like my fob chain, for instance, has a button battery. Yeah. So a question about that, just kind of specific and very, very particular. So when my youngest was baby aged, there were some toys that had batteries, and some of those were button batteries. And I noticed that some of them, the battery chamber was secured by a screw. Now, is that sufficient, or should we just eschew any kind of button battery toy at all?
There have been cases where that screw is not sufficient and it comes out. And then, so I wouldn't rely on that.
Okay, excellent.
Especially when you weigh the risk benefit of the toy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's plenty of toys out there that don't have that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it's true. Actually, we saw during COVID, when children were playing at home more often, I believe battery injuries to children went up 93%, or some really high statistic like that, because batteries, as well as button batteries, are just in so many household items. So it's really an important issue to be aware of.
Okay. Now that brings a related question that came across to my attention recently through an EMT and a paramedic that I know, so imagine a household with the 1-year-old or the 2-year-old, well, probably not the 1-year-old, but the 2 or 3-year-old who, there are toys, choking hazards, strangulation hazards for them. but they've got a 9-year-old elder sibling who is playing with the Legos with the small pieces and parts because they at that point know better than to chew on them. Well, hopefully they know better than to chew on them. And then what are some ways that we can keep the younger ones safe while getting age appropriate toys and games for the older child?
Yeah, that's such a good question because it's a issue that many households face, different age children in one household. And I mean, each family has to make their own decisions. Some families that I've spoken with have decided, just because the risk is so great, not to have small parts for any of the toys for any age groups, because they can get left behind. Other families have decided just, to decide certain rooms are for certain toys. But really, it is an issue because you have to be on top of it because, kids are kids and kids are going to leave toys laying around. So, I don't want to tell people never to buy small part blocks for their older children, but you just have to figure out in your space, how can you separate it? Can it work? And if not, weigh the risks and decide, is it worth it?
Yeah, I suppose it is kind of unreasonable to expect a 9-year-old to clean up after their Lego session.
Yeah.
To spec.
Yeah. Well, it always, when we usually have a projectile toy on our list every year, and often the warnings say, and some of these projectiles can shoot up to 200 feet. I mean, with tremendous force. And some of the warnings, often the warnings say, do not point when playing at, eyes or faces. So I don't know a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old that has, such great aim that they can avoid the eyes and faces of their friends. But it's just, it just brings up the issue that, when you buy a toy, read the warnings and instructions. And if it doesn't seem realistic that can be followed in real life, you may make the decision to avoid that type of toy.
That's really smart. And you mentioned projectile toys make the list as well, because
usually there's a
always
projectile
something.
toy. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the eye injuries we've seen, they can be very serious and permanent, and you just don't expect it when you buy a toy that could be the end result. Many of these toys are sold without protective gear, but with or without protective gear, because as we were talking about, kids play is always unexpected. Those types of toys can be potentially hazardous.
Have we not seen A Christmas Story? You'll shoot your eye out. You'll shoot your. I mean, the warnings are there.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting point about taking a look at the instructions, at the warnings, and asking yourself if the child the age you're getting the toy with can reasonably be expected to manage to abide by those rules. I remember being in 5th grade getting my first chemistry set, and of course it said to wear goggles and have adult supervision if I was going to set anything on fire. And I set a lot of things on fire, and I never once wore my goggles or got adult supervision.
Right.
Because I was a 5th grader with a chemistry set. That was not a realistic ask.
Yeah. I mean, some of these warnings are great, but often they're not sufficient. There's not enough warnings, or again, even the warning itself, a lot of them warn of intestinal blockage and death. I mean, that's not really an option I would want when I give a kid a toy.
And with intestinal blockage and death, more recently, are those some of those magnet kits showing up on the worst 10?
Oh yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I really want to talk about that. We've been talking about those for a while, but the high-powered magnets, very important issue. They're not like the magnets that you remember, growing up, that you put on your refrigerator, to hang up your most recent quiz from school. They are extremely powerful, and when children have and do swallow more than one, they attract to each other inside and can cause severe intestinal damage, sepsis, death. I mean, it's just horrendous, the types of injuries. So they can be sold as toys. I would recommend families become very aware with what has happened in the past, and they may make the decision to avoid those. But they also would be sold as just, desk toys for adults. But there's very few homes that are kid-free, and very few spaces in general. So it's just really something to think about. Do you want something that can cause such a serious injury to a child in your home, in your office space?
And to be clear, what I've understood is the main risk with those is if you swallow two of them and then one gets around one side of the bend in the intestine and the other isn't, then they attract to each other through the tissue.
Yes.
And then that can create all kinds of horrible.
Yeah, and they're attractive to young children. They're shiny, they're small. Young children under 3 put, everything in their mouths. So it's just really something to be aware of.
And they're also attractive to adults because they're sciencey.
Yes.
And so, as a parent who tries to encourage STEM, one of the things I've heard is if you decide to use these magnets, get them, keep them in a case up above, think about storing it the way you think about storing your chemicals, or if you're a firearm household, your ammunition and firearms, and then take that out for a specific session of science exploration to play with your child, counting carefully, and then put them back in that safe space.
Yeah, that's great advice because they are potentially dangerous, so they should be treated that way. Another issue that is also so serious are the gel balls. I don't know if you're familiar with those. They're gel balls that if they get wet, they expand, and they are sold just themselves for children to build with, or they're also sold as ammunition for certain toy guns. And actually, a few days ago, a mother had was on the news because her daughter swallowed, I believe it was a single gel ball, which expanded with the fluids in her body, and she needed 3 emergency surgeries. It led to sepsis. I mean, very serious injury. Last summer, we spoke about the issue of the gel balls in these guns. Actually, there was a social media challenge called the 4Bs challenge. And you heard about that? It was for older kids, and it encouraged teenagers on some of the social media platforms to go out into public and target strangers, try to hit them with these gel balls from their guns. And in one case, I believe it was a 16-year-old hit a teenager in the face and injured her eye. And not only was there an injury involved, but he was actually arrested because of the assault. And so, I mean, there's so many issues here. We're talking about the potential for eye injury. We're talking about after you shoot these guns and the beads are left, maybe in your backyard where a small child can get them. That could be the potential for ingestion injury. And then of course, the influence of social media on older kids.
And these gel balls there, how big are they?
Tiny.
Initially, tiny, like
they're
BB
tiny.
size, marble size.
Like maybe they're different size, but maybe some of the size of your nail, some smaller, depends on the brand.
And then they expand significantly, multiple times their original size when
you're holding your hand up bigger than your head. I don't know if they get that big.
Okay,
but they
like
expand.
even the softball size.
Yeah, I've never seen one expand that big, but they expand. They expand enough certainly to cause intestinal blockage and serious injuries. And I don't know what it is of how much they expand.
That sounds like the plot of a 1940s noir movie. Ha ha ha, sir! I've made you swallow this thing that's going to expand to 100 times its initial size if you don't find the antidote in time and give me the money. And we're making a toy out of that.
Yeah. It's actually, if you saw these, they're really colorful. They're very attractive to children. I mean, they actually, some of them, in my opinion, look like food. And the parent whose child was recently injured, made an excellent point, a point that we talked about actually on our last at our last summer safety conference, which is if parents knew about that the hazard was so serious, knew that it could expand once ingested. They could make a more informed decision about whether to buy it, and she had no idea.
And I think that is one of the big problems that WATCH is working to address, which is that the flow of information is not fantastic.
Right.
And you were talking earlier about how getting the information even past the starting line is a chore and a challenge. And then the infrastructure isn't there and isn't well known.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I'm thrilled that you're doing this episode, because it's, it's interviews like this that we can get more information out.
Yeah.
It's very important.
And so honestly, how well do you think the the Yelp review and Amazon review ecosystem does in terms of protecting us?
The reviews on Amazon.
Yeah, the reviews on like Amazon and Yelp and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rely on the safety information.
Yeah.
But what is very important when you are, I mean, obviously a lot of holiday shopping is done online. You can avoid crowds. It's convenient. You can stay in your pajamas. So, online ordering is here to stay. But we do want to point out that when you're ordering online, read all the warnings that you can, but also, if possible, have the toy sent to you before you send it to a child, because often the warnings online can be inconsistent with the warnings on the packaging. Sometimes there's more warnings on the packaging, and you may make a different decision when you read those. Sometimes, just examining the toy and the instructions, you can find things that you didn't see online. So when you order online, you still have the opportunity to physically inspect the toy. So we're encouraging that before gifting it to a child.
And I know that for a lot of adult products, you can Google the user manual, owner manual instruction set for the product. Usually you can just get the PDF online. And I imagine that would work in some cases. Yeah,
that's a great idea. And I mean, the more information you can get, the better to make an informed decision.
Excellent. So far our naughty list has included choking hazards, strangulation hazards, magnets, and projectiles, which, although projectiles are fun, that seems like a predictable one to put on the list. Things that shoot at things. And then these gel balls, which was new. I hadn't actually heard of those.
Yeah.
What are other ones that are routinely coming up these days?
Well, one toy actually that causes the most injuries every year is the top of the list in terms of injuries, are non-motorized scooters. So it's worth mentioning because they cause so many injuries, and people just may not be aware of that. Very popular toy, especially during the holidays, and when people are gifting toys. But just be aware, if you choose to let your child participate in that type of activity, you make sure they're wearing the appropriate safety gear, helmets, arm pads, elbow, whatever is recommended. I think part of the issue is, parents really do have a right to expect that a toy is safe to be used the way it's advertised, or just safe to be used at all. And that's often not the case. So, we're just encouraging parents to be aware that just because a toy is being sold, just because you find it on a toy store shelf or online, doesn't mean that it's been properly vetted, and you may need to vet it yourself.
So let me make sure I heard you right, that the scooters, like your Razor scooter,
the non-motorized,
those cause more injuries. More kids are getting hurt off of those than bicycles and skateboards even?
Well, than any other toy. It depends, it's the issue of categorization. They may not be categorizing bicycles as a toy.
Well, that makes sense, because I was just thinking the number of bicycles I see versus the number of scooters, going, wow, what are they making those out of? Dynamite? Okay. And so again, like you said, proper safety equipment for the Razor scooters helps, and modeling, wearing a helmet when you go out on your bicycle, skateboard, scooter, what have you.
And there's a lot of tools parents can use to examine toys, and the 10 worst toy list is a good tool, because you can look at the toys on the list and see what those hazards look like, see what a small pump hazard looks like, see what a strangulation hazard may look like. But there are certain hazards that, families can't guard against because you can't physically examine and find these hazards. And one of these hazards is toxic chemicals like lead. And there were multiple recalls this year of toys with lead in them. I know this is a podcast, but
this year,
visual, I'll show you. Yeah, this was you're called this year a toy with lead. It's a toy house with lead paint, and I mean lead is a known toxin, and these toys just keep making it to the shelves of stores, and it's
how?
Yeah.
Is it manufactured somewhere with a less stringent regulatory environment, or are these things being made like in California?
Well, once it enters the United States, it's subject to the restrictions here. But I mean, part of the issue is that it's a huge industry, maybe about $28 billion industry, is millions of toys, and there's just not enough regulatory power to catch all of these infractions. So it really has to start with the manufacturers and the designers to make sure that their products are safe, because once it's out there, even if it's recalled, it's still out there. Doesn't mean anyone's going to get notice of the recall. It's really in a position where it can harm a child. So, I mean, there are toys that are recalled, or dangerous toys that aren't recalled, and they can put children at risk for generations, because they can end up in schools and people's toy boxes at yard sales. So, I mean, the repercussions really can go on for years.
I have to admit that prior to this conversation, I was kind of thought that lead paint on children's toys was a yesterday thing, not a thing that's still happening today. So that's a bit of a shocker.
Yeah, it's multiple. I was just looking at the recalls yesterday. Multiple recalls of toys with lead.
So that should illustrate to everybody just the degree to which it's on us as the parents and the uncles and the toy buyers and the aunts and the grandmas to to check to see if there's lead in the freaking paint, which I would not have thought I would have needed to check in this millennium.
And that's hard to check as a consumer. So really, the burden really should not be on the parents and the families.
Yeah, but should and is, there's a very large gap between those two things, unfortunately.
Yes.
Like I'm thinking back up, my grandfather passed a couple of years ago, and we were cleaning out his house and found junior science kits that he had gotten for my dad and his uncle, which included uranium. Right? And I think of lead paint on kids' toys as something from that era. Not but apparently, yeah, I'm a little mind blown right now.
Yeah, well, I speak to a lot of people, and I get that reaction a lot, because it's crazy that in this day and age that some of these hazards that existed 50 years ago are still out there. I mean, it just shouldn't be.
No, it really should not. So, any other major items on that list that we should be aware of? Major genres of toys that are causing a lot of trouble. I don't want to, spoiler your entire press release from next week, but
well, there's something that we usually do have on the list. We've talked about small parts, and small parts can come in all different forms. It can be a toy that actually has a small part, like a doll with a ribbon that can detach, or a toy that's not manufactured well, so that a small part isn't obvious when you buy it. It's just a piece breaks off after you buy it. But there's also another choking hazard out there that many people aren't aware of. It's oblong shapes, for instance, like drumsticks or xylophone sticks, or rattles for babies. Many of them were recalled in the past because they had shapes that a child could mouth and choke. So it's a similar issue when you're talking about drumsticks or anything with an oblong shape. And we usually find toys with that every year. So it passes the small parts standard because it doesn't fit into a small parts tube that the industry and government use because it's long. But if a child puts that down their throat, it could be a potential choking hazard. So that's really an important one a lot of people are not aware of.
Oh, so much like you shouldn't give your infant a baby carrot, you should cut it into tiny pieces, or a hot dog.
Yeah.
Same kind of, that's the kind of risk we're looking out there. Okay.
Yes.
Huh. Outstanding. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today to come and speak to our listeners. But before I go, what's the really smart question that I haven't asked you yet that I should have?
I think you've asked a lot of very smart questions. So what I'd like to leave listeners with is just to remember that, and this can save lives, that not all toys are safe. A lot of people have a false insecurity that there are, safety nets that will catch unsafe toys before they're on the market. And that is, as we've talked about, is not the case. So we encourage families to be vigilant, do your own investigation, know the types of hazards to look for, look at the list and get a general idea of what a hazard may look like. There are many hazards out there, but there is a lot that parents can do this holiday season and year round to make sure that they can identify the red flags.
And it sounds like there isn't really another grown-up who's watching as carefully as we will. There's not a regulatory board out there. There's not a toy shop owner or a manufacturer quality control professional whose job it is to make sure that that particular toy is going to be safe for our children. It's on us.
Yes.
I just one thing occurred to me, that I'm a huge nerd. I do a lot of tabletop role-playing games, a lot of board games. And one of the things I learned a little while ago that's on this topic is most games come with an age recommendation. And that recommendation is not about mental development, like how old does your kid have to be to understand the rules or the content. It's about how small the parts are. And that came as a surprise to me, but that is a place where kids can also be at risk for a choking hazard. Because, we want our 4-year-old to be 100% okay to play Pandemic or Scrabble. But they're 4, meaning those pieces are going to go in their mouths.
Yeah, definitely important to pay attention to those warnings, those age recommendations, but don't rely on them, because as we talked about, sometimes there can be a choking hazard, even if a toy says that it's appropriate for a baby.
Excellent. And where can people find out more about WATCH and its mission?
You can go to toysafety.org. And there's a lot of information there about toy safety. And next week will be the new toy release. And then don't forget to sign up for the Consumer Product Safety Commission toy recalls.
Outstanding. And folks, this video will be releasing about a week after we do the recording. So by the time you see this, the report will be out, and they can get that at toysafety.org.
Yes, you can get the full report there.
Just in time to finish up your holiday shopping before Black Friday.
Yes.
So thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. This is not it's not the most fun. It's not the most exciting topic on child safety. We're not going out there learning jujitsu or getting range time or taking a defensive driving course, but it's one of the most important and the one that we will interact with at one time or another as parents. So thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for getting this information out there. Really appreciate that.